Bears can strike without warning, whether in the wild or among people. From an RV massacre in Russia's Amur region to a circus mauling before a horrified crowd, these encounters reveal how fragile safety can be. In this video, we'll explore 6 terrifying bear attacks that have shaken both wilderness and human settings. On September 7, 2025, the Petrov family settled into their RV along a forested road in Russia's Amur region. They had been traveling for days, eager to enjoy the quiet wilderness before returning home. Alexei, a factory worker in Khabarovsk, loved the outdoors and often took his family on short trips, teaching them to respect nature while escaping the noise of city life. His wife, Tatiana, had packed warm blankets, food, and books for the children, wanting them to feel safe and comfortable even in remote places. Their daughter Mila, only 10, carried her sketchpad everywhere, filling it with drawings of animals and trees. At the same time, 7-year-old Daniil was full of energy, curious about every rustle in the forest. Together, they hoped for a peaceful night before the long drive back. The evening was calm. The children read quietly in their bunks while Alexei checked the RV's locks, and Tatiana heated a small meal on the stove. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly, shadows deepening as night closed in. The family had camped before, but this road felt lonelier, surrounded by dark pines and distant hills. Still, inside the RV, the warmth of home traveled with them. They believed the walls of the vehicle would shield them from anything that moved outside. At around 2 a.m., the fragile calm shattered. A massive grizzly, gaunt with hunger, slammed against the side of the RV with a roar that shook the thin walls. The vehicle rocked violently as claws scraped against the metal frame. Glass shattered as the beast ripped through a side window, showering the interior with shards. Panic spread instantly as the family scattered, each movement frantic against the noise of tearing steel. Alexei grabbed the nearest object he could find, a fire extinguisher, and rushed forward. His effort was brave but hopeless. Within seconds, the bear's weight pinned him down, its claws and jaws tearing through him as the family screamed in horror. Blood spread across the floor while the walls shook with every impact. Tatiana, desperate, shoved Mila into a storage hatch and gestured for silence before turning back toward the bunks. Daniil tried to hide beneath the blankets, but the predator lunged, ripping through wood and fabric with terrifying ease. Tatiana's last stand was short as the bear's rage crashed down upon her. Mila crouched in the dark, hands pressed over her mouth, trembling as every sound tore through the night. Screams, crashing wood, then silence, broken only by the growls and the noise of the animal rummaging through the wreckage. Time stretched endlessly inside the ruined RV as the child waited, her heart pounding in her ears. The RV stood broken and silent as dawn spread a gray light over the Amur forest. Mila remained curled in the storage hatch, body stiff and mind frozen, the air thick with the stench of blood and the heavy musk of the predator that had torn her family apart. Hours dragged slowly and the child did not move, terrified that the beast might still be nearby. Every creak of the shattered vehicle made her flinch. The walls of the RV, once a safe shelter, now stood twisted and splintered, a cage filled with wreckage and memories too heavy for her young heart to bear. Outside, the forest carried on as if nothing had happened. Birds called through the morning mist, and a cool breeze pushed branches against the torn sides of the vehicle. The Grizzly had left after tearing through food and supplies, leaving only scattered pieces of clothing, broken furniture, and the silence of loss. The massive paw prints leading back into the trees were deep and wide, a testament to the unstoppable force that had struck during the night. When locals from a nearby settlement finally arrived, alerted by the absence of the Petrovs, who were expected on the road that morning, the sight before them froze their steps. The RV's windows were jagged holes, doors torn from hinges, and the ground stained dark. The scene spoke clearly of what had unfolded in those violent minutes. As they approached cautiously, one of the men noticed a faint, soft, and uneven sound coming from inside the wreckage. They found Mila still hiding, her small frame pressed against the cold metal walls of the hatch. She was bloodied, her clothes torn, her face pale and streaked with tears, yet she was alive. When she was lifted gently from the hiding place, she clung tightly, trembling, eyes wide and unblinking. Her silence told more than words ever could. Officials arrived quickly, marking the site as one of the worst bear incidents the Amur region had seen in decades. Rangers followed the tracks into the forest, but did not locate the animal, knowing it could still be roaming nearby. They warned that food scarcity, shrinking habitats, and human encroachment had made grizzlies in the region unpredictable and dangerously bold. The Petrov family had unknowingly camped in a corridor where hungry predators roamed. their presence magnified by the scent of stored meat and warm food. Mila was taken into the care of relatives, her survival viewed as nothing short of miraculous. For the community, the tragedy served as a poignant reminder of the fine line between wilderness and safety. Villagers reinforced warnings about camping in isolated areas, underscoring the importance of caution. They emphasized the need for stronger barriers between people and wildlife. In the weeks that followed, the story of the Petrovs spread beyond the region. To many, it was not only a tale of devastation, but also of one child's endurance. In the cold silence of that ruined RV, Mila had carried the weight of survival, a fragile life preserved amid chaos, echoing the harsh truth that the Amur forest spares no one who underestimates its dangers. September 2024 brought cool evenings in rural North Carolina, and the Harper family looked forward to a night out at the local drive-in theater. Lisa Harper, a 41-year-old mother of two, had grown up in the region and often spoke of her love for simple gatherings with her children. She worked long hours at a small-town grocery store, but weekends were reserved for family moments. Her husband had passed away years earlier, so outings like these were her way of keeping joy alive for her kids. The drive-in was a tradition she cherished, a place where cars lined up under the stars and families shared snacks, while films flickered across a towering screen. That September evening, the lot was crowded. Engines cooled while children ran between cars with popcorn bags and sodas. The Harper family spread a blanket in the back of their pickup truck, filling it with candy, sandwiches, and pillows. Lisa laughed as her children climbed over cushions, preparing for the start of the movie. Around them, other families mirrored the same excitement. Headlights dimmed, and the glow of the giant screen washed the night in pale light. The air was filled with warmth, chatter, and the comfort of routine. Beyond the edges of the theater, the woods pressed close. Few paid attention to the dark tree line, but inside the forest, hunger moved on padded paws. That year, poor acorn harvests had left black bears searching farther into human spaces for food. Drawn by the scent of buttered popcorn, sweet drinks, and grilled hot dogs, one such bear slipped quietly from the cover of trees. At first, its shadow blended with parked vehicles and wandering children. Some thought it was a prank, a costumed visitor there to add novelty to the event. But as it drew closer, its size and slow, deliberate steps silenced the laughter. The bear climbed onto the Harper's truck with startling speed, the metal groaning under its weight. Lisa turned instantly, instincts flaring, and moved to shield her children. With a swipe of its paw, the animal tore across her arm, slashing deep lines of blood as popcorn and candy scattered across the blanket. Gasps broke into screams across the lot as the danger became real. Chaos unfolded in seconds. Car horns blared as drivers jammed their hands against steering wheels, hoping to frighten the animal. Engines roared, headlights cut across the screen, and people shouted, urging families to flee. The surreal mix of a glowing movie and raw animal fury painted the night with confusion. The bear roared in return, slamming its body against the truck bed, claws ripping into metal as Lisa pulled her children down and tried to shield them. The once festive gathering had turned into a fight for safety. The commotion only grew louder, and the bear, overwhelmed by the barrage of sound and light, hesitated on the truck. Its eyes darted across the chaotic scene, nostrils flaring, body tense, torn between hunger and retreat. The night's calm was gone, replaced by panic that echoed beneath the towering screen. The black bear finally dropped from the pickup, landing hard on the gravel with a thud that echoed across the lot. Its claws scraped the ground as it swung its head from side to side, confused by the wall of sound and motion that pressed against it from every direction. Car horns blared in sharp bursts, headlights flashed wildly, and the noise of engines swelled into a storm. The animal reared once more, roaring into the night, before it turned away from the panicked crowd. With one last swipe at the ground, it bounded toward the tree line and disappeared into the woods, leaving chaos and fear in its wake. Lisa clutched her injured arm, blood soaking through her jacket, while neighbors rushed forward to help. Her children clung to her side, shaking, their faces pale with shock. Volunteers tore strips of cloth and pressed them against her wounds, trying to slow the bleeding. Sirens wailed in the distance as emergency responders sped toward the scene, guided by frightened calls from families who had fled the theater. The movie still flickered above them, but the images no longer mattered. What people carried in their minds was the vision of wild power breaking through the safety of a familiar place. Paramedics arrived quickly, lifting Lisa onto a stretcher and securing her children with concerned neighbors. As she was carried toward the waiting ambulance, headlights revealed claw marks gouged into the metal of the truck bed. Food lay scattered across the gravel, trampled in the rush of feet. Families gathered in small groups, their voices hushed, each retelling the moment when laughter turned to terror. Parents pulled their children close, whispering reassurances even as their own hearts pounded with unease. By the following morning, the story had spread across the town. Officials closed the drive-in while wildlife officers searched the surrounding forests. Tracks were found leading deeper into the woods, wide and heavy, a reminder that the animals still roamed near. Rangers explained that the shortage of acorns and berries had driven bears into towns, where they searched for scraps of food. The familiar border between wild and human space had blurred, leaving families shaken about whether anywhere was truly safe. Lisa survived her injuries, though deep gashes across her arm and shoulder required surgery. Doctors spoke of her quick actions, how she had shielded her children and kept them alive in those frantic seconds. Neighbors called her brave, praising her instinct to protect her family no matter the cost. Her children remained shaken, their memories marked by the image of the massive figure looming over them against the glow of the giant movie screen. For weeks afterward, the theater stood silent, its once busy lot empty beneath the towering screen. People drove past and remembered the night when a hungry wanderer from the forest invaded their evening, a night when everyday life collided with raw nature. The event became a warning across the county, a story shared in schools, churches, and homes, reminding all who listened that the wilderness could appear at any moment, even in places where no one expected it. August 2024 unfolded with long days of fishing near Kodiak Island, where men had traveled to test their skills against rich waters filled with salmon. Among them was Aaron McCoy, a seasoned pilot in his early 40s. Aaron had spent much of his life guiding fishermen and hunters across the rugged Alaskan coast. Flying small planes into remote inlets was his way of life, a craft he had mastered after years of battling unpredictable winds and sudden storms. Known for his calm focus, he carried the responsibility of not only transporting clients safely, but also ensuring their survival in wilderness conditions where danger was never far away. The group of fishermen he ferried that week had come for the thrill of pulling heavy salmon from icy rivers. They worked in pairs, hauling coolers filled with the catch that would later be flown back to the mainland. These were men used to long days and tough conditions, their clothes soaked with salt spray and fish oil. Spirits were high as they moved toward the dock, tired but pleased, unaware that the smell of their hard work carried farther than they imagined. The wooden dock stretched out over calm water, its surface slick with moisture from sea air. Aaron prepared the float plane for departure, checking lines, inspecting fuel, and reviewing the weather as the fishermen organized their gear. The scene was ordinary, almost routine, until the wilderness reminded them how thin the line was between safety and peril. From the thick trees near the shoreline came the unmistakable movement of something heavy. The sound of splintering branches echoed across the inlet, followed by the thunder of paws striking earth. A massive Kodiak bear, drawn by the rich scent of salmon packed in the coolers, appeared at the edge of the dock. It wasted no time circling or sniffing. Instead, it surged forward with terrifying speed. The men froze for a moment, the size and power of the creature too overwhelming to process. Shouts erupted as the bear lunged down the dock, claws tearing into the wooden boards. One fisherman stumbled as he spun to retreat, his boot sliding on the wet planks. He tumbled sideways into the cold water just as the bear's paw slashed out, shredding his thigh. His cry of pain mixed with the roar of the predator as red spread quickly in the waves. Panic spread through the group. Some swung gaff hooks wildly, trying to strike the advancing animal, while others hurled ropes and bags in desperation. The air was filled with the clash of human voices, the thrash of water and the thunderous roars of the Kodiak that refused to slow its assault. On the float, the injured man clawed at slippery metal, desperate to climb back aboard. Every second stretched like an hour as the bear pressed forward, eyes locked on its prey, muscles rippling with raw force. At the cockpit, Aaron acted quickly. His hands shook as he moved for the ignition, knowing their only chance was the machine he trusted. The float plane came alive with a roar as the propeller spun into a furious blur, churning air into a violent blast. The dock shook under the combined weight of the beast and the machine, each side straining in the standoff that would decide who claimed the space. The force of the spinning propellers blasted wind and spray down the dock, hitting the advancing Kodiak with a wall of power it had not expected. The beast staggered, fur whipping in the torrent, eyes narrowing against the stinging rush of air. It roared in anger, rising on its hind legs before slamming down against the wooden planks once more. The sound shook the men to their core, yet the machine's fury was greater. The animal lurched forward again, then halted as the spinning blades tore the air between it and the fisherman. With a final bellow that echoed across the inlet, it turned sharply and bounded toward the tree line, crashing back into the wilderness it had emerged from. For several moments, no one moved. The dock quivered in silence except for the drone of the engine and the splash of water against the floats. Then the cries of the wounded fisherman pulled everyone into motion. His leg poured blood into the dark water, the gashes deep and ragged. His face was pale, but his arms thrashed as he clung to the side of the float, refusing to sink. Strong hands reached down, pulling him up with effort, dragging him into the cabin where his clothes were stained red. Inside, the men worked frantically to slow the bleeding. They tied belts and rope tightly around his thigh, pressing cloth hard into the torn flesh. Aaron kept the propellers roaring, eyes locked on the tree line, ready in case the animal returned. Minutes felt longer than hours until he was sure the predator had truly vanished into the forest. Only then did he ease the throttle and prepare the aircraft for departure. The float plane lifted from the inlet with a shudder, and the men pressed against the windows, staring down at the dock that had turned into a battlefield. Below, the boards bore deep claw marks, gear lay scattered, and one cooler bobbed in the water, spilling salmon into the tide. The wilderness had left its signature behind, a reminder of what they had faced and narrowly survived. By the time the plane reached the nearest hospital, the fisherman had grown weak, his breath shallow. Doctors rushed him into surgery, stitching muscle and repairing tissue torn by the bear's claws. Hours passed before news came that his life had been saved, though the scars would remain as a permanent mark of the encounter. Relief washed over the group, though their minds still replayed the chaos again and again. In the days that followed, wildlife officers issued warnings to villages and camps near Kodiak Island. They explained that bears often learn to linger near docks during salmon runs, their hunger drawing them to the scent of easy food. What many had thought of as safe havens for fishing and travel could quickly become ambush sites. The men who lived through that day carried the memory with them, the sound of roaring wind clashing against a roaring beast etched forever in their minds. For Aaron, the moment served as proof of the thin line between control and catastrophe. The dock had almost been their final resting place, yet quick action and a machine's power had shifted fate just enough to spare them. July 2025 brought searing heat across Wyoming, where wildfires burned for weeks and crews labored day and night to keep the flames from consuming more of the land. Among those crews was James Turner, a 34-year-old man who had dedicated his adult life to fighting fires in the most unforgiving conditions. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the calm confidence of someone who had faced danger many times before. Years of experience had taught him to endure smoke, exhaustion, and risk, but he also carried the weight of leadership, guiding younger firefighters in the field. His crew respected his steady presence, and he often took on the hardest tasks without complaint. The camp they built deep in the scorched forest was little more than tents, a supply cache, and tools spread across ash-covered ground. Charred trees stood like black skeletons, and the air smelled of smoke even at night. Days were filled with cutting fire breaks and hauling gear. Nights were restless, spent listening to the crackle of distant flames. The crew had worked until their muscles ached before finally lying down under the smoky sky. They did not know that in the same hills, a massive grizzly had been roaming, thin from hunger, its normal food gone from fire and drought. At 3 a.m, the quiet of camp was broken by the tearing sound of claws raking into boxes. The bear had found their food cache and was scattering supplies across the ash. Plastic cracked, metal rattled, and wrappers tore as it gorged on whatever it could find. James Turner rose quickly, instinct pushing him forward. Grabbing a shovel, he charged at the bear, swinging with all his strength in an attempt to drive it away. The animal spun with shocking speed, its eyes burning with frenzy. In one bound, it closed the distance, slamming James to the ground. Its weight crushed the air from his lungs as claws tore through his fire-resistant clothing as if it were paper. The shovel flew from his grasp as pain ripped through his body. The sound of his cries tore through the camp, waking the others. The crew leaped from their tents, grabbing Pulaskis and axes, the tools they used to carve fire lines, now raised as weapons. They shouted, struck at the air, and lunged at the beast, but each blow only seemed to enrage it further. The grizzly roared, its massive head snapping from side to side, its claws slashing at the men who dared approach. Sparks flew from steel, striking the ground as the crew tried desperately to save their comrade. James writhed beneath the beast, ribs cracking under its weight. muscles torn by raking claws. Ash filled the air, the firelight from smoldering stumps casting a red glow over the chaos. Desperation mounted as every second stretched into eternity, the crew's efforts seeming hopeless against the raw power of the predator that had claimed their camp. The moment seemed lost until one firefighter raised a flare gun, aiming not at the sky, but directly at the raging animal. With a loud burst, the flare ignited and struck, burning into thick fur. The sudden blast of fire and searing heat shocked the beast, which reared back, thrashing wildly. Smoke and the smell of scorched hair filled the camp as the predator bellowed in fury. For several tense seconds it stomped the ground, swinging its head in confusion and rage, before finally retreating into the charred hillside. The forest swallowed its massive form, leaving only echoes of its roars fading into the night. Silence gripped the camp except for the labored breathing of the men and the groans of James lying broken on the ground. His body bore deep wounds across his shoulder and chest, and his side rose unevenly with each painful breath. Blood stained the ash beneath him. His comrades dropped their tools and swarmed to his side, their hands pressing against torn flesh, wrapping bandages made from scraps of shirts, doing anything to keep him alive. Every face was pale, every hand shaking, the weight of what had just happened heavy on them all. Through the long hours before dawn, the crew kept watch, fearing that the bear might return. They built small fires around the camp, not for warmth but as barriers of light and smoke. The smell of burned food lingered in the air, mixed with the iron scent of blood, both reminders of the close call they had faced. James drifted in and out of consciousness, his groans softening into silence, his survival resting in the hands of those who refused to let him go. At first light, they signaled for help using radios and flares. A helicopter finally arrived, its rotors chopping the smoky air as it descended near the burned clearing. Medics carried James aboard, working quickly to stabilize his broken ribs and torn muscles. The rest of the crew watched as the aircraft lifted into the sky, the sight evoking both relief and a sense of emptiness. Their leader and friend had gone to fight another battle in a distant hospital. In the days that followed, the story spread through nearby towns. Officials warned that wildfires not only destroy land, but also push starving animals closer to humans, creating dangerous encounters in unexpected places. For the firefighters, the camp that night became more than a memory. It was a lesson written in blood and ash, a reminder that nature's fury comes in many forms, from flames that consume mountains to predators that stalk in the dark. James lived, though scars covered his body, and his strength would take months to return. His survival became a symbol for his crew, proof that even when chaos strikes without warning, courage and swift action can prevent disaster from becoming fatal. Yet none of them forgot the sound of claws tearing through camp, or the weight of knowing how close they all came to being lost in that blackened wilderness. August 2021 was a busy season on Kodiak Island, where cruise ships carried groups of travelers, hoping to glimpse the world's largest brown bears in their natural habitat. Among those who stepped off the vessel was Michael Harrington, a 42-year-old tourist who had long been fascinated by wildlife. Back home, he was known among friends for his love of photography and for posting dramatic pictures of his adventures. The trip to Alaska had been a lifelong dream, planned for years, and he carried with him not just excitement but also an eagerness to capture images unlike any he had taken before. His phone was his constant companion, every scene through its lens becoming part of a collection he wanted to share with the world. Guides and rangers greeted the group with firm instructions. They spoke clearly about the dangers of approaching bears, warning that distance was the only real protection when entering their territory. The other tourists nodded, uneasy but attentive as they stepped into the rugged wilderness. The rivers shimmered with salmon runs and the scent of fish carried through the damp air. Along gravel bars, the bears moved with slow, deliberate power, dipping their massive paws into the water with ease. Cameras clicked from safe vantage points, the visitors awestruck by the sheer scale of the creatures. For most, the warnings were enough. They stayed clustered together, their guides keeping them close. But Michael's desire for a close-up burned stronger with each passing minute. His eyes locked onto one enormous Kodiak fishing at the edge of the current. Its fur was dark, wet with spray, muscles rolling beneath the thick coat as it hauled salmon from the water. It was the moment he had been waiting for. Quietly, while others were distracted, Michael slipped away from the group, his steps slow and careful as he moved toward the gravel bar. The bear continued its hunt, seemingly unaware, while Michael crouched low, lifting his phone. He positioned himself so the animal filled the frame, his own face tilted toward the lens. For a heartbeat, everything seemed perfect. The wilderness behind him, the massive predator in focus, his smile frozen in the glow of the screen. Then the animal raised its head. Its nose flared, eyes sharp as it fixed on the figure too close for safety. In an instant, its calm hunt turned into violent motion. With a surge of speed that defied its size, the bear charged down the gravel bar. Michael stumbled backward, his phone tumbling into the stones as panic seized him. Shouts erupted from the distant group, but the predator closed the distance in seconds. He tried to turn, tried to flee, but the Kodiak was upon him, claws striking his back and dragging him into the shallows of the river. Water splashed as the force of the impact sent him sprawling. The scene turned from wonder to horror in an instant, the wilderness revealing its merciless edge. Water churned as the bear's massive weight crashed into Michael, its claws raking deep and its jaws snapping with raw power. The gravel bar turned red as he was dragged across the stones, his body twisting helplessly under the strength of the predator. The tourists, standing with the guides, froze in shock, their shouts echoing across the river, but drowned out by the roar of the animal. Panic spread as some backed away toward the boats while others stumbled, unable to look away from the violent scene unfolding in front of them. The guides reacted with desperate speed, pulling flare guns from their packs. Bright streaks of light cracked into the air, hissing and sparking, but the predator did not release its grip. Warning shots echoed from rifles, ringing through the mist, but the sound only made the animal lift its massive head, its jaws stained, before lowering it again with terrifying force. Within seconds, silence replaced screams. Michael's struggle ended as the river carried the splash of water and the shifting of gravel back into stillness. The bear, gaunt from hunger, finally pulled away, its dark eyes flashing toward the group's flashing lights. For tense moments it stood broad and unyielding, every breath steaming in the cool air, as if daring anyone to come closer. The guides continued to fire, the air filling with smoke and sparks, until at last the animal turned. With heavy steps it retreated into the trees, vanishing between the dense trunks as quickly as it had arrived. What it left behind was horror that would never fade from the minds of those who had witnessed it. The tourists gathered in shock, many weeping, some clinging to each other as their bodies trembled uncontrollably. The guides moved quickly, keeping them together and urging them to the boats, while others stayed behind to mark the place. Phones had captured fragments of the chaos, screens shaking as the story burned itself into memory. But none needed proof. Every face showed the same truth. They had seen the cost of ignoring warnings in a land where survival depends on respect for nature's laws. When rangers arrived hours later, they found the gravel bar torn and stained, the scattered phone still lying in the stones where Michael had dropped it. The body was carried carefully from the shallows, covered, and placed onto the boat with solemn silence. The group sat wordless as they were ferried back, the joy that had filled their excursion erased by grief. In the days that followed, the news spread quickly. Reports described the attack as one of the most chilling in recent memory, not because of numbers, but because of its cause. Curiosity and recklessness had turned into tragedy, a reminder to the world of how little stands between safety and disaster in wild country. Officials repeated their warnings, urging future visitors to listen, to remember, and to understand that on Kodiak Island, distance means life. For the survivors, the image of the glowing movie-like scene they had expected was replaced forever by a darker one. The sight of a man reaching for a perfect picture had turned in an instant into a lesson that none of them would forget. November 2022 brought a cold wind to the city of Lublin in Poland, where a small traveling circus had set up its striped tent on the edge of town. Among the performers was a veteran animal trainer named Marek Kowalski, who had spent most of his adult life working with large predators. He was well known in his circuit for taming lions and teaching bears to perform routines for cheering audiences. Yet behind the applause, the work carried shadows. Long hours, constant stress on the animals, and the strain of keeping them obedient left marks both on the beasts and those who controlled them. Marek bore scars on his arms from past close calls, each one a reminder of how little control existed once an animal's patience snapped. The star attraction of that night's performance was Boris, a European brown bear that had been part of the circus since it was a cub. The animal, now fully grown and at its peak strength, was chained and fitted with a muzzle during each show. Trainers had conditioned it to balance on stools, roll barrels, and even bow to crowds under the glare of bright lamps. Children often clapped and laughed, their parents snapping photographs of the unusual spectacle. But those who worked closest to Boris had noticed his restlessness growing. In the days before the performance in Lublin, Stagehands whispered about the bear's pacing, its loud huffs, and the way it resisted commands. On that November evening, the tent filled with families eager for entertainment. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of the crowd, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Music played from worn speakers as the performers led Boris into the ring, his chain clinking as he stepped heavily across the sawdust floor. Marek guided him to the center, raising his hands to cue the start of the routine. Under the harsh lights, Boris was made to stand, shift weight, and perform gestures unnatural to any wild creature. The audience clapped, delighted by the display, but tension brewed unseen beneath the surface. Boris's muscles tensed, his chest heaving with sharp breaths. Sweat shone on Marek's forehead as he pressed the bear into another trick. In a sudden eruption, the animal broke from the sequence. With a violent surge, Boris lunged forward, knocking Marek to the ground. The chain snapped free from its anchoring, clattering against the stage. Chaos spread instantly. The crowd gasped as the huge form towered over its handler, claws flashing in the glare. Marek struggled beneath the crushing weight, the muzzle tearing loose as the bear slashed downward, ripping through his shoulder. Screams echoed against the canvas walls as benches toppled and people stampeded toward the exits. Parents clutched their children, stumbling in the rush as the once-ordered tent collapsed into panic. Boris bit into Marek's leg, the sound of tearing fabric and flesh mixing with the frantic cries. Stagehands scrambled with extinguishers, releasing bursts of white spray across the ring, filling the air with choking clouds. Others fired blanks from small pistols, each shot cracking through the noise. But the bear, wild-eyed and furious, held on. The performance had turned into a nightmare in seconds, the scene spiraling into pure chaos. The fire extinguishers sprayed thick white mist that clung to the air, clouding the scene as Boris thrashed in confusion. The blasts of sound from blank rounds cracked louder, bouncing inside the canvas walls. The bear hesitated for a brief moment, blinking through the haze, muscles rippling as it swung its head from side to side. Marek lay broken beneath the heavy form, his clothes shredded, his body slick with blood, but still clinging to life. With one last furious swipe, the animal finally staggered back, stumbling toward the cage that had been hastily rolled into the corner. Stagehands moved in frantic unison, slamming the steel gate open as others waved poles and sprayed more bursts of smoke. Shouts mixed with the roars of the beast as it lumbered into the shadows of its pen, driven less by obedience than by the chaos surrounding it. The door clanged shut. The lock snapped in place and the tent fell into stunned silence, broken only by the cries of the injured trainer. Families continued to rush out into the cold night, some carrying children, others trembling as they stumbled across the muddy field beyond the tent. Inside, the aftermath grew heavier. Marek was lifted carefully by medics who had been called from outside, his torn leg wrapped in cloth as they tried to slow the bleeding. His shoulder hung uselessly, bone splintered by the weight of the claws. His face was pale, his breathing ragged, but he was alive. Every step to carry him out was marked with fear that the bear might lunge again, though the cage rattled only with the echo of its heavy breaths. By morning, the attack had become the talk of the city. Newspapers printed stark accounts from shaken spectators who described the sight as nothing less than terror. Parents spoke of children who cried through the night, haunted by the sound of roaring under the striped roof. Officials arrived to investigate, their questions sharp, their faces grim as they examined the cage and the chains that had failed. Debate soon filled the streets. Voices rose against the use of wild animals for tricks, calling the scene proof of cruelty and danger. Others mourned the sight of an injured trainer, wondering how long scars and pain would follow him. For Marek, survival came at a terrible cost. His career forever ended, his body marked by wounds that would never fully heal. For the witnesses, the memory of that night would never fade, a chilling reminder that no cage or chain could erase the nature of a bear forced to perform.